In mid-February, Matt and Nicole left their suburban home and headed to Reelfoot Lake in northwest Tennessee to spend a weekend watching and photographing the bald eagles there. They were both avid bird watchers and spent every free weekend enjoying their hobby. They were empty nesters now. Their youngest son had gone back to college a month before, after a wonderful Christmas break. Their two older children were married and had families of their own. So now the couple felt the freedom to travel and do the things that they loved. This trip had been a spur-of-the-moment thing. They liked things that way. Friday morning, Matt had called his wife from work and asked if she thought she could ditch her job for the day with him, pack up, and head to Reelfoot. "Let's do it," Nicole said with a guilty grin. "I'll meet you at home in 20 minutes. If we hurry, we can be in Union City in time to get a good night's sleep and be ready to go first thing tomorrow." By 8 o'clock that night, the couple had settled into their warm hotel room. They had decided not to pay for one of the Eagle tours so popular with tourists. They wanted to try to make their way back into the swamps on various roads to spend the day exploring. They wanted to get photos of these eagles away from the crowded boats that usually ferried tourists around the lake. Matt spent a few hours poring over maps of the area to find a way to drive back into the deep woods surrounding the lake. He knew the wet winter logging road conditions would make traveling by car almost impossible, but if he could get them within walking distance of some eagles, he would be very happy. Hunting season was over, so there would be no problems with that, and no one ever dared getting to the eagles this way. They went to sleep that night with great anticipation for the next day. From available accounts, the couple woke the next morning and traveled to a place on the north side of the lake, which is so far back in the swamps that people seldom travel there, even the locals. There's no access to the lake and virtually no one has any reason to be there. They had followed the less traveled path to get great photographs of these eagles and waterfowl that are so plentiful in the area. The decision to go to this place was the worst decision they could have made. Reelfoot Lake was created in 1811 by a massive earthquake in the New Madrid Fault, which runs from St. Louis to Memphis. The lake gets its name from a legendary Chickasaw Indian prince whose nickname was Colopin, which in the Chickasaw language means Reelfoot. The nickname given to the chief due to a birth defect leaving him with a deformed foot. The area surrounding the lake is wrought with a violent history. The Civil War took its toll in West Tennessee, and in the early 1900s, locals started another war attempting to repel large land grabs by northern agricultural corporations. The area in the river delta is fertile ground and perfect for growing cotton, a cash crop that made the biggest landowners rich men. Today, Reelfoot Lake and the shallow lowland swamps and bayous that surround it, shaded by bald cypress and covered with lily pads, is a peaceful place. The 20,000-acre area is a tourist destination, popular for fishing and waterfowl hunting. Another attraction is the hundreds of bald eagles that winter at the lake and the surrounding areas. The local economy benefits from the bird watchers and nature enthusiasts who visit each year to see the eagles. On Monday, local law enforcement got a call from the couple's oldest son who said that he had not heard from them since Friday when they had called from the hotel room in Union City to tell him where they would be for the weekend and that they would be home late Sunday night. The son had tried all the cell phone numbers, the couple's home phone, and had even called the hotel but had gotten no answer. The hotel employee said the couple had left a Do Not Disturb sign on their door, so housekeeping had not cleaned that room since Friday morning. The employee had checked the room and found the luggage but no occupants. The police had checked the room as well and everything looked normal. Local law enforcement put out a call to look for a car matching the model and color of the car they were driving. But as darkness fell on that Monday night, no one had reported the car. The next morning, a helicopter was sent to view the remote areas around the lake. 2 hours later, the car was found from the air on the north side of Reelfoot Lake in a very secluded and hard-to-get-to area. Cars were dispatched, and by noon, officers were on the scene at the car. What they found baffled them. The car was on an elevated road with water standing in the woods on both sides. The car was sideways in the narrow gravel road with the front end off in the water. The car had been damaged. There appeared to be claw marks all over the trunk and the roof. The sunroof had been ripped out, and there were shreds of clothing hung in the debris of the sunroof. As the officers looked over the area, they tried to piece together what had happened, but it made no sense. While a group of searchers in hip waders wandered into the flooded timber on each side of the logging road to look for the couple, another officer walked the road behind the car. He followed the tread impressions back several yards and saw where the couple had stopped the car in front of an area where water covered the road. They had somehow maneuvered the small car to turn it around in the narrow road so that the car was pointed in the opposite direction, or pointed back the way that they had come in. Stepping off into the water in the flooded road, he walked another few feet, and the road emerged from the water and was clear. But ahead there were trees and brush laying across the road, blocking vehicle access. He saw their footprints in the muddy road and followed them. The couple had apparently walked around the downed trees and made it almost a mile down the winding road that went to nowhere. They had stopped and turned around to head back. On his way back to the car, he saw the boot prints heading back to the car, but they were different. Somewhere about halfway back to their vehicle, they had started running. The tracks were twice as far apart as the tracks going in, and there were obvious signs of mud and gravel kicked up behind the tracks. They were running hard. Then he saw it. It was a different track, a deep impression in the mud that looked like a bear track. But it wasn't a bear track. It was too narrow, more like a dog, but he had never seen a dog track this big. He looked further and saw another, and then another. His eyes were locked to the ground, looking in amazement at what he was seeing. Then, as he waded around the trees laying across the road, he saw that the tracks continued, but there were now two sets of animal tracks, some filling the tracks left by the couple. They were being chased by two large animals. As the officer approached the rear of the car, he looked at the damage from the car in a different light. Was this damage done by a bear? There are no bears in this area. What could it be? One of the teams searching the swamp returned and reported that they had not found anything on the west side of the road, but they needed to be dressed for it and would return with their winter gear to search further. The helicopter was now called in again to search from the air. When the team from the east side of the road returned, the officer asked a couple of those men to come with him and look at the tracks he had found. They did and confirmed exactly what he had thought. Two animals were chasing this couple. They had made it to their car, sped off at a high rate of speed, only to be caught by whatever was chasing them and then extracted from the car. But where were they now? The search went on for days. Police and park officials used everything at their disposal to find the couple. The public even got involved. Several fishermen in the area began searching the lake and the bayous on the north end of Reelfoot. Sometimes searchers fought extreme winter conditions. Many in boats spent days breaking ice to get to areas that had not been covered, but in the end, they found nothing. The search was eventually called off, and the couple was listed as a missing persons case. Later the next summer, some teenagers were riding their ATVs in the same area. A pair of adventurous boys broke from the group and rode off into the woods that were now dry from the lack of rain that summer. They reached a large log pile and stopped to drink some of the cold beer they had brought with them. Sitting at the base of the log pile, they laughed and joked and talked about where they would ride to next. A large snake slithered from under the log one of the boys was sitting on, and he jumped into the pile to get away from the snake. The snake stuck around, and the other boy, who had laughed and made fun of his buddy, climbed the pile as well, and they both got a huge laugh out of the whole deal. Finally, climbing down from the top, one of the boys dropped his beer down into the brush. He could see that it was in reach, so he poked his arm down into the limbs, trying to grab the half-full beer. Looking down, he saw a large camera laying on the ground under the brush and logs. They beat the brush with sticks for a few minutes, making sure that all of the snakes ran out, and then crawled in to retrieve the camera. It was a large Canon digital DSLR with a very long lens attached to it. They packed it in the four-wheeler, and then they went about their day. Later in the evening, they tried the camera out. The battery was dead and they had no charger. They didn't expect the camera to come on anyway. In the battery slot, they saw the SD card. Pulling it out, they saw that the camera body had protected the car from the weather. They plugged the SD card in and started clicking through the photos. There were over 100. The first few were of a happy couple laughing and having fun on a road trip. Then some candid shots of an attractive woman in front of a hotel room. He began seeing images of the woods they had been in that day. He saw photos of woodpeckers, blue-winged teal, mallards, and other waterfowl. And then the last few photos got blurry, like the photographer had been moving, maybe even running. There was an out-of-focus photo of the woman and she was running. Looking behind her, she looked scared. A car parked on the road was the next image. Still blurry, but clear enough to see that it was a car. It was the last two images that made the boys gasp. It was a large black figure jumping over a downed tree in the road. The image caught the figure in midair and another larger animal right in front of it. Both animals were obviously in a dead-out run. The last photo showed the animals again, both on the road running, but closer to the photographer. And this photo was very clear. No blur. The photographer had taken his time on this one. These things were giant dogs with large canine teeth visible in the photo. They were jet black in color. They were lean and muscular. They had long arms or front legs reaching way out in front of their bodies while they ran. They were huge compared to the vegetation in the image. The boys called the police. They now knew whose camera they had found. The police arrived, talked to the boys' parents, and then took the camera with the SD card. Later that night, 2 federal wildlife officers showed up at the boy's house and asked to see the computer he had loaded the SD card in. The parents gave them permission to do so. The officer sat at the desk in the boy's room for 10 minutes working with the computer. The boy saw that the officer had installed a jump drive into the USB port and removed it quickly. Then the officers left. The family wondered what was that all about. The next morning, the kid went to log on to his computer to check his social media accounts. When he typed in his password, his account came up, and then the screen went blank, followed by a loud pop in his server. He looked under his desk to check the machine and saw smoke coming out of the vents, and he could smell the odor of electronics burning. His computer was fried. A week later, the police released a statement that clothing belonging to Matt and Nicole had been found under a brush pile a short distance from the location where the car had been found. They had also found a Timex digital wristwatch worn by Matt, and it was still keeping time. They never mentioned the camera or the images found on the SD card. The case is still marked as a missing persons case.